I do hope everybody is having a wonderful afternoon this 4th of May. It's really exciting to be back to talk to everybody about all things disability and neurodiversity. So, welcome. My name is Kim Whippy. I'm PwC UK's Inclusion and Enablement Services Lead, and I'm really delighted to be welcoming you all to our 3rd episode of Disabling Bias, which is our LinkedIn Live space to discuss all things disability, neurodiversity, and enablement. And as a reminder, we've called it Disabling Bias because it's all about talking about the barriers and the bias that are disabling people, rather than us taking that approach of considering the impairments or conditions. So it's all about kind of recognizing that we can tackle the stigma and look at how we enable people. So before I go much further, if you'd like to access captions for this session, you can do so through the event panel in LinkedIn by clicking the 3 dots in the bubble at the top of the panel. If you select that, you'll be able to turn on captions. Now, for today's episode, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity, but more specifically, the intersectional experiences of being neurodivergent, recognizing that for people who are neurodivergent, they're not so in isolation, right? They have other factors of their identity that contribute to the overall way that they experience the world, and then also in turn, how they experience their neurodivergence. So again, I'm delighted to be joined by 2 guests for this conversation. We have Yvonne Thomas, one of my colleagues at PwC, who co-chairs our neurodiversity community within our Disability Awareness Network. And we have Kim To, who is an ADHD coach and founder of Own Your Flair. And both of my colleagues today have graciously given their time to sort of share their experiences and talk through what intersectionality and neurodiversity means to them. So I'd love to let Yvonne and Kim introduce themselves to the people listening today. And if you could just give listeners a quick overview of who you are, what you do, and your connection to today's topic. So I'll start with you, Yvonne, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks, Kim, and hello to everyone listening in today. So as Kim said, my name's Yvonne. I'm based in London and currently work at PwC. I'm in the audit line of service and have been client-facing previously, but currently on secondment, where I focus on culture and behaviours within the line of service. Before that, I was a teacher, so taught for 5 years in North London schools. And I'm here today really to sort of share my experiences of being a Black woman who is neurodivergent. So I have a dyslexia diagnosis. So I've been diagnosed for about 15 years. And then also more recently have an ADHD diagnosis.
Thanks, Yvonne. And as mentioned, thanks so much for giving your time to be here today and to share that with us. Over to you, Kim.
Hi everyone. So I have dyslexia and was diagnosed with ADHD during the pandemic, and I also have suspected autism, which I'm waiting to get a diagnosis for. So I'm currently a certified ADHD coach. What that means is I've trained to be very specialized in the coaching area of supporting people with ADHD and also other neurodiversities one-on-one. Most of my clients are people of color and women diagnosed pretty much in the last couple of years. So that's been very interesting to support these range of clients. I also work as an accelerator manager at City University. So I'm very interested in entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs in their journey, especially disabled entrepreneurs. And fun fact, I actually used to work at PwC back in 2015. I was on the graduate program in management consulting. It was called the Founders for the Future program. And I really enjoyed my time at PwC 2 years ago. So I'm here mostly to talk about neurodiversity, especially from the lens of being late diagnosed and from the Asian experience.
Thanks so much, Kim. And it's definitely always a pleasure to have a PwC alumna on the call, but also really exciting to hear about all the things that you've done since and how you've taken your experience into your kind of entrepreneurship and your career. So thank you so much for joining us. I'd really love to just get stuck in. So to start our discussion, it'd be great to explore representation a little bit more. And I think perhaps most people listening will be aware that it's estimated that 15 to 20% of the UK population are neurodivergent. But as we were discussing, because neurodiversity is about how, as humans, there is like just that variability in all of our cognitive functioning and behaviors, neurodivergence crosses all those boundaries of race and gender and sexuality and beyond. So yet there's often a particular view of what a neurodivergent person looks like, whether it's perhaps down to the privilege of who's been able to access diagnosis or what we see represented in the media. But I think recently and encouragingly, we're starting to see a bit of a sea change in who we recognize to be neurodivergent. And that's thanks to, pioneers like my colleagues on the call today, but also increasing research and advocacy. And that image is changing. But I want to come to you first, Kim, and actually talk a bit about your client base, because when we first met about a month ago, you mentioned a really interesting fact that I think you said 90% of your client base are late diagnosed women and 90% are ethnic minorities.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
sorry, I was going to say, yeah, could you just tell us a bit more about why you think that is and then how that's kind of played out for your own experiences?
Yeah, so I think the key thing to say is that there is stigma in neurodiversity, but people don't really talk about the cultural stigma. So especially for communities of color, there's just a huge cultural stigma. So for example, I'm originally from Vietnam. We don't talk about mental health. When I told my parents that I was diagnosed with ADHD, they called it, the crazy gene or whatever. So there's not a language to respectfully talk about mental health as well as neurodiversity. So there's a lot of stigma in these communities to actually talk about the subject of neurodiversity and subsequently to go get a diagnosis and get support for. So that is one of the reasons that drove me to train as an ADHD coach, because I just didn't see any professionals in the neurodiversity space talking about intersectionality, about cultural influences, about all these things that impacted me at being Asian and being neurodiverse. And I think that just shows in my client base, because when you see representation, you are then more comfortable to reach out and get support. So I was very surprised that, pretty much most of my client base are people of color. I didn't think, people of color were actually reaching out and getting the support, but I realized they weren't doing that. It's because they just didn't they didn't feel seen and heard. So it's really important why we need representation and obviously events like this to talk about it and to signal that it's okay to start opening these very difficult conversations within our communities.
Thank you. I think I can see Yvonne nodding. I don't know if you kind of want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Sorry, classic jumping in. Definitely want to add. I think it's a really important point, Kim, that you're making about the community in itself, and do people have the language in the community itself. But I think also it's also important to recognise that there were already assumptions that people will make based on people's race or based on people's gender. So the angry Black woman stereotype, right, plays really well into like, oh, ADHD things. And so it's really hard to say, oh, I'm not actually an angry Black woman, or there is no such thing as an angry Black woman. Actually, maybe it's because of the way that they're presented, their neurodiversity looks different to how, as Kim said, it might be portrayed in the media. And there is a bit about giving up your power. So you come into the room, you see my face, and you can see that I'm a Black woman. So I don't have any choice but to engage with that part of my person and that part of my identity. And other people will make judgments about that. And it's human nature, people do. Whereas the neurodiversity part of me is a bit that I can hold back if I so choose, right? Like it's the bit that I can keep the power and I don't have to disclose it. So there is a bit about recognizing that sometimes people just don't want to share everything about themselves. They already feel like they're having to work over parts of their identity and prove themselves. And then if you sort of throw in another grenade of something else that they're going to have to justify why they are good at what they do, why it is okay that they're in the room might be, again, another reason why people don't feel able to talk about it in the same way as white peers.
Thank you. I think there's so much really kind of valuable perspectives that you've both just shared there, and things I'm hearing around kind of the access points that people have, whether that's the language that you speak or the culture that you're part of. I think it's too easy to forget that a lot of people's access point to neurodiversity is not the English language and is not kind of like to sort of take a top level view like that Western community kind of approach. And there's lots of different ways that people are coming at this, but also then at that individual level, you know, the I think sometimes the fatigue and the effort of how you're seen and how others see you. And I wondered, kind of, both of you doing what you do and taking that choice to be vocal, what it can be like to be seen as a role model and have others describe you in that way. You know, kind of, is that an experience that you've had? I'm sorry, I'll start with Kim on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I started doing this without really thinking much about it. So I started, writing blogs about what it's like to be Asian and neurodivergent and the shame that carried, originally. And for me, it was just more of a process of me processing my feelings and sharing it. And it just kind of happened that I started being an advocate in this space because I realized, oh, people are connecting with what I'm saying, etc. But it wasn't until I kept doing it that I realized that it was it took an emotional burden on me, because it's almost like I will always have to show up. And, if I needed a break, I would feel guilty because I would be like, okay, well, people want to be seeing what I'm writing about. They want to feel like there's representation. They want to feel inspired. Like I had many clients who reach out to me for coaching and say, I read your story and it just resonated and I felt hope. And that makes me feel good, but also makes me feel really scared at the same time, because I'm also figuring it out. I also have my tough days where I battle with still the feelings of guilt and shame that comes with being neurodivergent and Asian, right? So I really struggle because now I feel like I can't really share all the negative stuff that I feel I have to really share the positive stuff, because I need to inspire people. I need to carry on inspiring people. So I think there is a lot of burden, but at the same time, I find a lot of joy in doing it, because I can tell the impact it does have on many people, ethnic minorities, especially when generally they just don't see the representation anywhere. And I'm hoping more people will join the table and be inspired by my journey. So, for example, I've coached many people, and 2 of my clients want to become ADHD coaches who are both Asian as well. So I'm supporting them through that. So it's sort of a ripple effect. So I guess, so in short, it is a bit of emotional burden. You do have to throw yourself out there. It does get very exhausting, but at the same time, there's a lot of reward when you see your community, coming together and more people coming to the table to increase representation.
That's amazing.
Kim, I really echo that. As I say, as you said, like I get a lot of joy from doing it and feel able to do it. And I stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Like I'm here today as a Black person, as a woman in the UK, being able to be in a professional environment and share my story and feel that this won't then hinder where I'm going to be. But that's why allyship is really important, because there is an emotional toll, as Kim said. Like it is a lot. I always feel the pressure of, I don't want to let the community down. I don't want to give people a reason to be like, oh, this is why we shouldn't, because look, actually we've given someone an opportunity and they haven't used it. So there is that burden, and that's why allyship is so powerful, because actually you don't have to be part of the community to hold space for someone at the table. Like everyone has the opportunity to do that for a colleague or a peer. So actually, the more that we can also remember that it shouldn't just be about the people who are marginalised and sharing their intersectional experiences. There is just something about the other people who don't have those experiences doing the work and going out of their way to hold space for people.
Thank you. I really like what you say about holding space at the table. I think there's so much unseen that people don't recognize about what you've just described, the emotional kind of work that goes into this for you as individuals, for people in your communities. I love, Kim, that you spoke about kind of those kind of dual aspects of it being a burden and a joy. I think it's really clear to see it's been rewarding and you've kind of been able to impact on so many people, but that's not to recognize that it hasn't been hard. And I think kind of hopefully for people listening, there's some really clear tips to take away around actually there's things others can hopefully do to ease that burden, to kind of make way for people and to make it not be a case of always requiring those individuals to speak up and kind of bare their souls to kind of push that progress forward, while also thinking it's brilliant that you are able and kind of willing to share those experiences with us today.
Yeah,
go on.
Sorry, I think your question might lead on to this, so go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to kind of touch up on kind of that aspect of kind of allyship and community actually, and move on to sort of thinking about a bit of the things that Yvonne, you've been doing kind of with the community at PwC. So I don't know, Kim, if you wanted to kind of come in on any points before that.
Yeah, just on the point of allyship, incredibly important, because then it doesn't make me feel alone. So, actively supporting our story. So it could be little things like, sharing our posts online. That doesn't take a lot of energy. And just thinking about how you can elevate the voices within your team, because honestly, the amount of people that look at my post and share it and then say, because of your post, I had a conversation with my colleague who I suspected had neurodiversity, whatever, like allyship doesn't need to take a lot of emotional energy. So that's my message, is just find a way that you can just support us, even if it's like sharing our post, because it does do a lot.
That's a really great tip. I like that kind of idea of a bit of a ripple effect, that, you're kind of passing something on and people see it and then act on it. And you're right, it really doesn't take a lot. That's not a big ask, I don't think. So thank you for that. So yeah, Yvonne, I wanted to ask you a bit about the community that you see at PwC, and indeed the community that you have helped shape in many ways. And kind of, can you tell us a bit about the community, how you came to get involved, and kind of what you're most proud of having achieved so far?
Yeah, so this story actually comes a bit more about my personal story, and then it sort of evolves into how I sort of got into this space. So bear with me as I take you through. So as I mentioned earlier, I was a teacher before, and I actually did the Teach First programme. So I had an offer to PwC almost 3 years before I joined. And I love teaching, which was one of the reasons that it took a little bit longer for me to join. Really loved teaching, but also was really nervous, knew I was coming into audit and knew that there were going to be exams. And as I said, I've been diagnosed or assessed as dyslexic for a long time, and exams are not where I show my strength. The writing under pressure is not where I can express myself in the way that I know that I can verbally. So I was really nervous, but what I wasn't nervous about, which in hindsight I should have been a little bit more nervous about, was I didn't really think about the day-to-day job, because as I said, I'd been working for a while. I'd been a teacher for 5 years and I was managing it, and I had really robust ways of engaging with teaching and managing how I was dyslexic in that space. And so I just hadn't thought that, those might not work when I become an auditor. And so actually it came, so I was doing my exams and I was doing work and it was getting there, but I just had this moment of real frustration, like I couldn't express myself. I was working on an engagement. I was trying to document what I was thinking, and it was taking me so long. And I was really frustrated. And actually that then sort of built up into tears, and actually a senior manager at the time, we had a good walk around and talked, and by happenstance she knew a director who was also dyslexic, and I think that's really important, right? Because I didn't know anyone. I was looking up and I couldn't see that anyone was neurodiverse, because it's a non-visible disability. So in a different way to me thinking about being a woman in the workplace or a Black person in the workplace, where I could see those people above me really clearly, even if I hadn't necessarily directly engaged with them, or even if we're trying to build up those people at different levels, I could see them, but I couldn't for neurodiversity. And this director, Sarah Chandler, who also was in Audit, was phenomenal for me because she really sat me down and was like, okay, these are the things that I've done over my career to help me adjust or help me get the best out of it. And that actually really has changed my life, because one of the things she mentioned was workplace coaching, and I had workplace coaching, and that helped me reframe what I thought about dyslexia, because actually I hadn't really thought about it, but I'd been working with the assumption that dyslexia was a deficit that I needed to overcome to prove to everyone else that I'm okay. Whereas actually working with my coach, really I got the understanding of it's not a deficit, it's just I work differently. And so that's been really powerful from my experience. But again, really pointed to the fact that it's really hard sometimes to know who are those colleagues who you might be able to learn from when you're in the neurodiverse space, because it's not clear. People have wonderful ways that they've adapted and engaged with their neurodiversity to make sure that they thrive at work. So it's not obvious always for people, and actually you shouldn't be self-diagnosing people anyway. So for me, the reason that the community is so powerful is it gives people an opportunity to connect with other people and learn from other people and see their experiences and share with someone an experience that they might see they've experienced themselves and learn from them. And I just think that without having a visible space, it was really hard for people to connect. Like Kim, you said you were at PwC. And so there have been neurodiverse people at the firm for years, but I don't know if we've been connected in the way that we are or we're building today. And so that's the thing that really drives me to keep building the community so that people don't feel alone. And it leads to what I'm most proud of. It is those moments when someone connects with someone else and feels heard and seen and feels like, oh, you get it. Oh, or this is the advice I would give you, with the lens of, oh, I have a similar experience. Not the same, right? Because we're talking about today, it's intersectional. So someone who's a white male who has ADHD is not going to have the same experience as an Asian female with Tourette's, right? It's not going to be the same, but there are shared experiences that we can have within that. And that's what makes me proud. Every moment that we see one of those, it's like, yeah, it's the community's doing its thing. It's helping each other. It's providing that space for people to feel like, yeah, they belong.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's so kind of heartening to hear that people have been able to come together on those kind of shared experiences, whether or not their backgrounds are identical, which, let's face it, even kind of with only neurodiversity in the picture, there's so much kind of individual experience in that, but that people have still found that in connecting with one another, they can be seen. I think that's just so critical to kind of actually figuring out how it's going to be for you and your journey. So I think that is really something to feel proud of. Just before, Kim, I invite you into this, I want to remind people listening that you can leave us questions if you would like us to answer any questions at the end. And you can do so by leaving a comment on the LinkedIn event page. So there's the comments tab in between details and networking. But Kim, I'd love to come to you and hear your perspectives on community and that sense of kind of how it can help people make those connections and feel seen, and ask if you've got any thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think personally for me, community has been so important because during my diagnosis journey, I felt really alone and very depressed about it. And that's the thing that, you know, people of color or minority groups don't have the privilege of. They don't have the privilege of family support, right? I guess you can, I mean, not just anybody cannot have the support of family members because neurodiversity there's so much stigma attached to it. But for sure, in definitely in the Asian culture, there's a lot of a lot of guilt and shame in that. So I felt it was very in a tough spot. And it was only kind of building my own online community that I felt seen and safe. So I run a WhatsApp group where it's just women and non-binary people with ADHD. And that I've been running that for 2.5 years. And honestly, it's a godsend. It does make me feel seen. And it's just amazing that I don't know everyone's a stranger on there, but as soon as someone's going through a hard time, we can all chip in and, you know, share our perspectives and support. And people take the time out of their day to do that for complete strangers. And you can just see that you don't need to do much. You just need to set up a Slack channel, or I know there's a lot of WhatsApp groups these days, but the point is that it's so important for healing and so important to be seen, because as much as I can post online and share people about our experiences, truly no one really understands what it's like to navigate neurodiversity, as a woman, as an Asian person, whatever it is, unless you are in a community with other people experiencing similar things. And I think it's just human nature that you just want to feel connected, you want to be seen, and you want to be heard. So that's what I would say my piece on that. And that's why I think it's so important that I'm trying to build an Asian community that talks about neurodiversity in a positive way, because our culture has, placed a lot of influence in the guilty part of being different, especially when it comes to being Asian, and following a particular stereotype of what success looks like. That's why I'm trying my best to encourage my community to think very differently about this and, improve their mental health as a result.
No, thank you. I think the WhatsApp community you've created is such a great example of just having that space for people to to kind of be safe and to connect. And I've seen sort of similar kind of, in external communities online, but also in the firm where we have those chat groups. Sometimes you just need a space to say, I'm not having a great day today. And then I have really seen other people pick up on that and be there for one another. And I think in thinking about community, there's that internal community that is so key. But I think I do also want to reflect back to the people who may feel they're not a part of that community. And again, kind of put out that encouragement to say, kind of, how can you help create that safe space that is also a community in and of itself, but, where people may not feel that they kind of belong? How do you help them feel they belong? And that's not necessarily a request to say kind of, what are your tips? Because I know it's such a big question, but I think there's so much more as we consider like all the connections around our experiences of race, gender, and neurodiversity that people who don't share those experiences could be learning and could be taking action.
Kim, just to add to that, really, I think part of it is about understanding and engaging uncomfortably with privilege, and understanding, okay, what is your privilege? Like, so I am a Black woman, I'm neurodivergent, there are other bits and bobs that if you looked at my picture, you could be like, oh, this is how she's made up, but actually that's not the full picture. I had a really loving family and support, and really, Kim, slightly differently to you, I had a really supportive family in terms of my neurodiversity. And so then actually you can't engage with understanding how someone else's experience is until you recognize that the way that you look at your world is built from how you've been privileged. And it's not a bad word, like it's good, but understanding that will drive the lens at which you look to help other people, or which you engage with the world, and understand that not everyone will have that. And so come and meet them where they are, and recognize that just because you've had an experience that's been really positive in one way doesn't mean that that's going to be the same for someone else, or it's as straightforward for them to engaging it in the same way.
That's such an important point, Yvonne. I saw one of our colleagues actually, I think, make a comment on one of our message boards this week around privilege. And I think they said something like, it's not that you've made good choices, it's that you've had good choices. And I just thought that really resonated for me, because I think recognizing that there's been other, I use the word journey again, but there's been other kind of journeys and paths to kind of the experiences or the barriers or what's helped, what hasn't helped, and that those won't always be shared. And there's crossover and learning to be had. But I think just kind of people kind of being willing to step into that space of discomfort and bravery. And we do a lot around unconscious bias at PwC, for example, but from a really practical perspective of just acknowledging upfront, we have biases because we have brains, and therefore we can learn about them and we can challenge them. And I'm conscious that, we've been kind of really getting in depth and we're actually running out of time a little bit. So we've got about a minute left, and I'm not seeing any questions. I'd just like to invite you both, starting with you, Kim, to give any quick closing thoughts. If you could give one message to the people listening today, what would that be?
Yeah, just take the risk of sharing. I know it's uncomfortable, and I was so uncomfortable sharing my story, but it really is I think it was a good risk that I did start sharing.
Thank you. Yvonne?
Allyship is invaluable in this space. Thinking about holding space for other people, looking around your table, seeing the voices that you listen to, who do you get insight from, and making sure that that's representative of people.
Thank you both. That is so succinct and helpful. I think way more succinct than I can be. I mean, I've really got a lot from our discussion today, both in terms of understanding and appreciating the energy that it takes to kind of exist and have those intersectional experiences of neurodivergence, kind of from the perspective of a Black woman and an Asian woman. I think it's really kind of very wonderful that you're willing to share that and to share some of the joy and the achievement that it's brought for you and your communities as well. But I think there's a lot to kind of take away for people who don't share those experiences, or who do, but who want to kind of help move this forward around how do you create space for others? How do you elevate voices that aren't your own? And how do you take the time to listen to those other experiences? So thank you so much, Kim and Yvonne, for generously sharing your time with us today and for kind of giving your kind of lived experiences and your insights to all the people listening. If people do still have comments and questions, feel free to leave those on the LinkedIn event page, because we'll be able to pick them up afterwards. Feel free to connect with us if that's okay on LinkedIn. And that draws us to a close for today's episode of Disabling Bias, and we'll be back later this summer for our next discussion. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.